It was a kind of humid August morning in Martinsburg, West Virginia, that clings to your skin like a bad memory. The sort where the air hangs heavy with the scent of distant rain and unkept promises. On August 10th, 1991, around noon, the housekeeping staff at the Sheraton Inn pushed open the door to room 517. Expecting nothing more than the usual mess of rumpled sheets and forgotten toiletries from a guest who'd checked out. Instead, they stumbled upon a scene that would echo through the corridors of conspiracy for decades. The bathroom light flickered faintly, casting long shadows over tiles slick with water, and something far more sinister. There, naked in the bathtub, lay Danny Casolaro, his body pale and lifeless amid a pool of his own blood, with deep lacerations slicing across both wrists. 3 or 4 cuts on the right, 7 or 8 on the left, each one deliberate and severe. The era was one of fading Cold War shadows, where journalists like Danny chased leads through smoky motels and whispered phone calls. The early 90s air thick with the buzz of modems and the paranoia of government overreach. Those wounds weren't just marks of despair. They hinted at a struggle too profound for a simple suicide, raising questions about how a man so driven could end up like this, alone and exposed in a place that screamed of isolation. But the real chill came from what wasn't there. His briefcase and the stacks of research files that had consumed his life vanished as if swallowed by the very shadows he'd been pursuing. The hotel room carried the faint metallic tang of blood mixed with the sterile scent of cleaning supplies from the hallway. A stark reminder of how ordinary spaces could turn into tombs in the blink of an eye during those tense days of investigative fervor. Without those documents, the narrative of Danny's death tilted toward mystery, suggesting foul play had stripped him not just of life, but of the evidence that might explain why. Then there were the razor blades, not scattered haphazardly as you might expect in a moment of impulse, but neatly packaged in envelopes, tucked away like secrets in a drawer. In the subdued lighting of that bathroom, with the distant hum of traffic filtering through the window, it evoked the meticulous planning of an era where every detail in a case could be a coded message or a deliberate misdirection. Such orderly presentation undermined the chaos of a supposed suicide, planting seeds of doubt about whether Danny had truly orchestrated his own end, or if unseen hands had staged the finale. Adding to the unease, the hotel manager noted multiple keys issued for room 517, more than standard procedure would allow, floating around like ghosts in the machine of hotel security. The early 90s were rife with stories of breached privacy and shadowy accesses, the kind where a key card or a spare could mean the difference between safety and exposure in a small-town inn like this one. Those extra keys whispered of potential intruders, eroding the isolation of the scene and implying that Danny's final hours might have been shared with company he never invited. Witness statements only muddied the waters further, with some claiming the briefcase was seen earlier, while others swore it had never been there at all, their words clashing like thunder in the oppressive summer heat. Martinsburg in 1991 felt like a forgotten corner of America, where local police logs mixed with federal whispers, and the smell of diner coffee lingered in the air as investigators pieced together fragmented accounts. These contradictions tore at the fabric of the official report, revealing a puzzle where pieces refused to interlock, forcing us to question if the truth had been deliberately obscured. The police arrived to a room that reeked of tragedy, their initial observations noting the bilateral cuts so deep they severed tendons. Yet no cries for help had pierced the thin walls of the Sheraton. It was a time when true crime was just starting to grip the public imagination. With fax machines whirring late into the night and reporters like Danny navigating a web of international intrigue from modest hotel rooms. Such silence and suffering pointed to something orchestrated, a quietus that didn't align with the agony those wounds would inflict, leaving us to ponder if Danny's voice had been silenced before the blades ever touched skin. And here's the knot that tightens the noose on any tidy explanation. The briefcase, laden with notes on a vast conspiracy, wasn't just missing. It had been accounted for by some eyes and erased by others. A vanishing act that defies the logic of an undisturbed room. As the noon sun filtered through half-drawn curtains, casting a pall over the blood-stained porcelain, the weight of that discrepancy settled like dust on forgotten files, challenging every assumption about what happened in room 517. In the shadowed underbelly of Washington, D.C., where power brokers whisper deals over bourbon in dimly lit bars, Danny Casolaro emerged as a freelance investigative journalist, the kind who chased shadows that others dared not touch. It was the late 1980s and early 90s, an era thick with the residue of Cold War paranoia, where fax machines hummed late into the night and cigarette smoke hung like a fog over piles of yellow documents. Casolaro, with his rumpled suits and unyielding curiosity, dove headfirst into a labyrinth of scandals that seemed to interconnect like veins in a dying body. He coined the term the Octopus for this sprawling entity, a metaphor for a conspiracy that wrapped its tentacles around everything from covert intelligence operations to high-stakes financial fraud, suggesting a hidden network so vast it could manipulate governments from the shadows. At the heart of it all lay the PROMIS software, originally developed by Inslaw in the 1970s and 1980s as the Prosecutor's Management Information System, a tool designed to streamline case tracking in U.S. prosecutor offices, its code humming with efficiency in the fluorescent-lit halls of justice buildings across the country. But the air in those offices grew heavy with betrayal when Inslaw declared bankruptcy amid litigation against the Department of Justice, alleging that the DOJ had misappropriated and unauthorizedly distributed the software, turning what should have been a straightforward contract into a quagmire of legal wrangling and whispered accusations. This wasn't just a business dispute. It festered in an atmosphere of Reagan-era intrigue, where the scent of scandal mingled with the metallic tang of filing cabinets stuffed with redacted files, implying a deeper rot where government agencies might bend the rules to serve unseen masters. Casolaro believed PROMIS had been modified with backdoors for intelligence use. These altered versions, sold internationally to track dissidents and funnel data back to shadowy operatives. A revelation that painted the software not as a mere tool, but as a weapon in the arsenal of global surveillance. Picture the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of modified PROMIS builds, their code twisted in secret labs amid the hum of mainframes and the faint odor of overheating circuits, underscoring how technology, once innocent, could be corrupted into an instrument of control. This belief linked the Octopus to broader scandals like the BCCI banking fiasco, where billions flowed through illicit channels, the air thick with the rustle of counterfeit bonds, and the distant echo of shredded documents, hinting at a financial web that funded everything from arms deals to political slush funds. Then there was Iran-Contra, the infamous affair of arms sales and rebel funding that reeked of cigar smoke in Oval Office meetings. And the bitter aftertaste of plausible deniability, revealing how intelligence manipulations could topple regimes or prop them up without a trace. Casolaro saw alleged covert fund transfers weaving through it all, money vanishing into offshore accounts like ghosts in the fog-shrouded streets of Zurich, implying a conspiracy where the lines between legal and illicit blurred into oblivion. As a lone journalist navigating this minefield, Casolaro hoarded binders filled with court records, depositions, sworn statements, and lead pages, all crammed into a battered briefcase that smelled of aged leather and spilled coffee. His independent style a testament to the grit required for long-form book projects in an age of soundbite journalism. The streets of D.C. buzzed with the click of typewriters and the murmur of informants in dimly lit diners. Yet Casolaro worked alone, piecing together puzzles that others dismissed as paranoia, which only amplified the danger of challenging powers that thrived on secrecy. It was in this complex world that Casolaro found himself entangled, his notes scribbled in the margins of legal briefs under the harsh light of motel lamps. Each connection he drew, tightening the noose of implication around a system rotten to its core. But here's the thread that unravels the DOJ's polished facade, despite their denials. The persistent whispers of backdoored promise versions circulating in foreign hands expose a vulnerability that no amount of red tape can conceal. Casolaro's pursuit wasn't fueled by glory, but by cynical understanding of how these scandals interlocked. The air heavy with the scent of burning midnight oil, as he connected dots from Inslaw's downfall to international espionage. In his battered briefcase, those leather binders held more than paper. They cradled the weight of truths that could topple empires, each page a step deeper into the Octopus's grasp. The Promise saga, with its origins in bureaucratic efficiency, had morphed into something sinister: the bankruptcy of Inslaw, a stark symbol of how innovation could be crushed under the boot of institutional greed. Amid the political intrigue of the time, where scandals like BCCI and Iran-Contra dominated headlines, Casolaro's hypothesis suggested they were mere arms of a larger beast, lurking in the depths. His long-form approach allowed him to delve beyond the surface, collecting sworn statements that echoed with the gravity of betrayed trusts and hidden agendas. The modified Promise builds, allegedly equipped for surveillance, pointed to a world where privacy was an illusion, traded for power in smoke-filled rooms. Casolaro, ever the thoughtful cynic, navigated this with a journalist's detachment. Yet the implications gnawed at him, suggesting that the Octopus was not just a theory, but a living entity. As we pull back from this intricate web, remember that Danny's journey through it led him straight to that fateful trip to Martinsburg, his briefcase heavy with the secrets he'd uncovered. We've just unraveled the twisted threads of scandals and the shadowy legal underbelly that fed into the Octopus, showing how Danny Casolaro's pursuit left him isolated in a world of whispers and warnings. Now, let's narrow our focus to those final, fateful weeks leading up to his trip to Martinsburg, where the air thickened with promise and peril alike. It was the sweltering start of August 1991, and Danny Casolaro, that relentless seeker of hidden truths, was gearing up for what he hoped would be the breakthrough in his investigation. The summer heat pressed down on Virginia like a heavy blanket, humidity clinging to every breath, while fax machines hummed in dimly lit home offices, spitting out pages of cryptic leads amid the drone of cicadas outside. This build-up wasn't just about logistics. It revealed a man on the edge of revelation, yet burdened by the weight of what he'd uncovered, pushing him toward a meeting that could either crown his efforts or crush them underfoot. Casolaro had arranged to meet sources in Martinsburg, West Virginia, on August 8, 1991. Individuals who dangled the promise of key documents linking the Inslaw/PROMIS affair to sprawling networks of intelligence ops and financial deceit. The small town. Nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, with its quiet streets lined by aging brick buildings and the faint scent of river mist from the nearby Potomac, stood as an unlikely stage for such high-stakes intrigue, far from the buzzing corridors of Washington power. In those preparations, you could sense the gravity of his quest, how it pulled him deeper into a labyrinth where every new connection risked exposing not just scandals, but personal vulnerabilities that no journalist could ignore. He carried with him a battered briefcase stuffed with extensive research materials, pages upon pages of notes, transcripts, and witness accounts that chronicled his dives into the Octopus. The leather was worn from constant handling, scuffed by airport floors and late-night diner tables. Its contents a tangible map of his obsession, in an era when information traveled by courier and corded phones rang with urgent calls. That briefcase wasn't merely luggage. It symbolized the accumulated peril of his work, a portable vault of secrets that might have drawn unseen eyes, amplifying the threats already circling his path. Witnesses would later confirm his arrival in Martinsburg that day, checking into the Sheraton Hotel with an air of determined focus. The lobby echoed with the murmur of travelers, the faint aroma of overbrewed coffee mixing with the polish of marble floors, a mundane setting that belied the explosive potential of what he carried. Such verifications underscored the reality of his journey, hinting at how his optimism masked the undercurrent of danger, turning a routine trip into a pivotal crossroads in the narrative of conspiracy. In the weeks prior, Casolaro had confided to friends that he felt in too deep, a phrase that hung heavy amid the cigarette smoke of late-night conversations and the clink of whiskey glasses. This was the early 90s, a time when the Cold War's echoes still reverberated, and investigative reporters navigated a landscape dotted with anonymous tips and the ever-present hum of modern connections. Those words betrayed more than exhaustion. They illuminated the psychological toll of chasing shadows that might chase back, eroding the line between hunter and hunted in his relentless pursuit. He'd received threats, shadowy warnings that slithered through phone lines and unsigned letters, intensifying as his probes into the Octopus grew bolder. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia, the kind that made every slammed door or unfamiliar face in a crowd feel like a harbinger, set against the backdrop of a nation grappling with its post-Reagan secrets. These threats weren't idle. They wove into the fabric of his investigation, suggesting that his digging had rattled cages in high places where power protected itself with silence and intimidation. Yet, remarkably, Casolaro remained upbeat shortly before departing for Martinsburg, his voice carrying a spark of excitement over phone calls to family and colleagues. The optimism shone through like sunlight piercing storm clouds, In an age when hope for justice often clashed with the cynicism bred by Iran-Contra revelations and covert ops exposed. This positivity hinted at a breakthrough within reach, but it also masked the accumulating strain, revealing a man driven by conviction even as the depths threatened to swallow him whole. His extensive and obsessive engagement with the octopus theory had consumed him, turning casual inquiries into a full-blown crusade that dominated his days and invaded his nights. Notebooks filled with frantic scribbles lay scattered in his study, the air heavy with the scent of ink and aging paper, while the world outside moved on with mundane routines. That obsession wasn't mere dedication. It amplified the professional and personal pressures, positioning him at the heart of a storm where sensitive investigations could attract not just attention, but lethal opposition from those entangled in the web. As he prepared for Martinsburg, the sense of being on the cusp grew palpable, yet so did the isolation, with friends noting his distracted gaze and hurried words. It was a moment steeped in the noir essence of the era, where lone wolves like Casolaro chase dragons in the fog of forgotten scandals. Here lies the fracture that defies any narrative of simple coincidence. For how could a man so vibrant in his pursuit step into shadows that would soon engulf him entirely? The build-up painted a picture of inevitable collision, where optimism met obsession and threats loomed like gathering thunder. It set the stage for what came next, pulling us ever closer to the heart of the mystery. Following this build-up, we will perform a slow-motion recount of the critical incident itself, recreating the hours leading to and the moment of discovery, allowing listeners to visualize and grasp the complexity of that day. We just retraced Casolaro's arrival and mindset before his final meeting, setting the stage for the fateful day filled with tension and promise. Now, we reconstruct with granular detail the tragic discovery on August 10th. It was the morning of August 10th, 1991, in the quiet corridors of the Sheraton Hotel in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where the air hung heavy with a mundane hum of a small-town weekend. Housekeeping staff moved like shadows through the halls, knocking on doors and turning down beds, oblivious to the darkness that awaited in room 517. The housekeeper, a woman accustomed to the routine surprises of hotel life, forgotten wallets, rumpled sheets, the occasional lingering scent of cheap cologne, approached the door around 11:30 a.m. Her cart squeaking faintly on the carpeted floor, she knocked, waited, and when no answer came, she used her key to enter, expecting perhaps an empty room or a guest still dozing off a late night. What she found instead shattered that ordinary rhythm, a scene that would echo through investigations for years, raising questions that no official report could fully silence. The bathroom door was ajar. Steam from an earlier shower perhaps still clinging to the mirrors. And there in the bathtub lay Danny Casolaro, naked and lifeless, his body pale against the porcelain. Deep lacerations marked both wrists, the cuts deliberate and severe. 3 or 4 on the right, 7 or 8 on the left, blood pooling in the water that filled the tub to about halfway, turning it a grim crimson. In the oppressive heat of that August day, the metallic tang of blood would have mixed with the stale humidity of the enclosed space, a sensory assault that spoke of violence done in solitude. These wounds weren't superficial hesitations, but bold, asymmetrical slashes that suggested a frenzy or perhaps something more calculated. Implications that tugged at the edges of the suicide narrative, hinting at a struggle or an unwilling hand. Why the disparity in numbers, one wrist bearing twice the marks of the other, as if time or resolve had wavered unevenly? Scattered around the scene were razor blades, not loose and haphazard but packaged neatly in envelopes, found near the tub and on the floor, their presence orderly amid the chaos. In an era before widespread forensic dramas on television, such details might have seemed innocuous to first responders. Yet, they carried the weight of premeditation, or worse, staging, in a town where scandals rarely made the local news. The water in the tub, still and stained, implied the act had occurred not long before discovery, the body not yet cold. But the envelopes raised silent questions about intent. Were they brought by Casolaro himself, or placed there to construct a tidy explanation for an untidy end? No signs of forced entry marred the door or windows, the lock intact and the room secured, suggesting whoever inflicted those wounds had access without resistance. But in the dim light filtering through heavy curtains, the absence of struggle painted a picture of resignation, or perhaps deception, in a hotel where anonymity was both a service and a shield. This seamless entry fed into theories of foul play, where trust or trickery could have opened the door wider than any crowbar, leaving investigators to ponder if Casolaro had let in his own demise. Then there were the conflicting witness accounts about a briefcase, that elusive container of Casolaro's notes and research files, whispered about in hushed tones among the staff. Some recalled seeing it in the room during earlier checks, a black leather sentinel by the desk, holding secrets from his Octopus investigations, while others swore the room was bare of any such item when the body was found. In the bustling aftermath, with police tape fluttering in the breeze outside and reporters gathering like storm clouds, these discrepancies sowed seeds of doubt. Each contradiction, a thread pulling at the fabric of the official story. Only one staff member definitively remembered the briefcase, her account standing alone against a chorus of uncertainty. It's this solitary recollection that gnaws at the coherence of the suicide verdict, a lone voice amid the din that suggests removal or disappearance under cover of confusion. Adding to the puzzle, the hotel manager noted multiple keys for room 517 in his report. Keys that could have been duplicated or distributed without record. In a place where guests came and went like ghosts, the echo of clinking metal keys evoked an era of less secure lodgings, where privacy was a polite fiction. Such multiplicity opened doors, literally, to possibilities of unauthorized entry, implying that Casolaro's sanctuary might have been breached by those shadows he chased, turning his pursuit into a fatal trap. The missing briefcase, with its trove of documents on government conspiracies and shadowy figures, became the phantom at the heart of the mystery, its absence more telling than any presence. Whispers in the lobby and behind closed doors speculated on what it contained. Names, connections, the very tentacles of the octopus, and who might have spirited it away in the hours before discovery. In the stifling atmosphere of that summer day, as word spread through the hotel like wildfire, the briefcase's vanishing act challenged every assumption, a void that screamed of intervention rather than oversight. These elements, the cuts, the envelopes, the water, the keys, the conflicting tales, wove a tapestry of enigma in room 517, where the scent of cleaning solvent would soon overlay the tragedy. But the questions lingered, heavy and unresolved. As the housekeeper's screams echoed down the hall, drawing hurried footsteps and shocked gasps. The scene solidified into a puzzle that defied easy assembly, each piece hinting at forces larger than one man's despair. Next, we will explore the immediate aftermath, law enforcement arrival, family reactions, hotel and witness responses, and early media coverage to capture the chaotic response to the event. The door to room 517 swung open that muggy August morning in 1991. And what the hotel mate found wasn't just a body. It was the start of a whirlwind that would sweep through Martinsburg like a bad dream you can't shake off. Local police were the first on the scene, their boots echoing in the dimly lit hallway of the Sheraton, where the air hung heavy with a metallic tang of blood and the faint, lingering scent of cheap hotel soap. They secured the room, cordoning it off with yellow tape that fluttered slightly in the draft from an overworked air conditioner, while hotel staff whispered in clusters, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights, wondering how a quiet guest like Danny Casolaro could end up like this. The emergency response kicked in swiftly, paramedics arriving with their kits and grim efficiency. But it was already too late. Casolaro was gone, his body slumped in the bathtub. The water stained a deep crimson that spoke of finality. Berkeley County Coroner Sandra Brining was called in to pronounce the death, her official stamp on the scene coming amid the chaos of flashing lights and radio chatter. In an era when small-town West Virginia wasn't accustomed to mysteries that smelled of something bigger than a local tragedy. That pronouncement set off a chain of events that would raise eyebrows for years, because it implied a rush to close the book before all the pages were even read. The autopsy was performed on August 14, 1991, at West Virginia University, where pathologists in sterile labs dissected the facts under harsh overhead lamps, noting the slashes on his wrists and the absence of any clear struggle, all while the humid summer air outside pressed against the windows like an unwelcome observer. But here's where the timeline gets slippery. The embalming happened rapidly, perhaps the very same day or the next. The fluids pumped in before the body had even cooled fully, in a process that felt more like erasure than preservation. This haste meant that any further forensic exploration was hampered. Toxins or subtle clues washed away in the chemical tide, leaving investigators with a puzzle missing key pieces right from the start. Families were notified after the embalming, their phones ringing with the worst news imaginable, delivered in clipped tones over crackling lines, while the body was already prepared for burial, denying them the chance to demand a closer look or a second opinion in those raw initial hours of grief. Casolaro's brother Tony later spoke of the shock rippling through their home in Fairfax, Virginia, the kind of numbness that settles in like fog on a bayou, mixing confusion with the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right about the speed of it all. Local media reports captured that early speculation, headlines in the Martinsburg Journal splashing across breakfast tables, stirring up whispers in diners where coffee steamed and locals debated whether this was suicide or something shadowed in conspiracy, the air thick with the scent of fried eggs and uncertainty. They noted how the rapid embalming limited forensic follow-up, a procedural oddity that echoed through the reports like a discordant note in a jazz solo, suggesting perhaps an eagerness to tidy up loose ends before questions could pile up. Then there were the contradictions about the briefcase. Some witnesses swore it was there in the room, stuffed with files on the Octopus, a web of intrigue involving spies, arms deals, and shadowy figures, while others claimed it vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving empty spaces where answers should have been. These conflicting statements from hotel staff and first responders painted a picture of disarray, the humid August heat amplifying the tension as police logs noted the discrepancies without resolution, hinting at a deeper chaos beneath the surface calm. It's this mismatch in accounts that erodes the foundation of the initial findings, like termites in the woodwork of an old detective's desk. Custodial control over evidence seemed lax, with the missing files becoming a specter that haunted the family's sense of loss, turning grief into a quest for truth amid the procedural oddities that dotted the timeline like unexplained footprints in the mud. Federal examiners hovered on the edges, their involvement a faint whisper in the background, as if the small-town machinery was grinding forward, without fully accounting for the bigger picture. The family's reactions were a tapestry of sorrow and suspicion. Casolaro's mother, receiving the call, felt the world tilt, her living room suddenly too quiet, the summer sunlight filtering through curtains that now seemed like veils over hidden truths. Media speculation fueled the fire, with reports highlighting the confusing sense of loss, how a man chasing shadows ended up eclipsed by them, leaving behind a void that no official statement could fill. In those first chaotic hours, as the sun climbed higher over Martinsburg, the emotional weight pressed down, a mix of procedural haste and unanswered questions that would propel the story into deeper waters. It was a moment where the rush to embalm clashed against the need for clarity, creating ripples that still disturb the surface today. And as the family grappled with their grief, the early investigations loomed, promising rigor but delivering anomalies that begged for scrutiny. The immediate emotional and procedural aftermath gave way to a methodical forensic examination and emergent questions about evidence handling and witness reliability, setting up the framework for the official inquiry. Now we dive into the early investigative steps. In the dim, stuffy confines of that Martinsburg hotel room, where the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the faint whisper of regret, the Martinsburg Police Department arrived on scene, their boots scuffing against the worn carpet as they began their initial procedures. They noted no signs of forced entry, the doorframe pristine and unmarred, locks intact as if the tragedy within had invited itself. It was the summer of whatever year this shadow fell. But the heat outside did little to warm the chill that settled over the investigators, who moved with the cautious precision of men accustomed to death's unannounced visits. This absence of intrusion suggested a solitary end, yet it lingered, like a question mark in the margins of the report, hinting that perhaps the darkness had slipped in through subtler means, unbidden and unseen. Evidence collection proceeded methodically, flashbulbs popping in the low light, capturing the scene's grim tableau. Scattered papers, a half-empty glass, and those multiple razor blades glinting under the harsh glow of police lamps. The blades were found strewn near the body, their edges dulled by use in a room that smelled of desperation and cheap motel soap, evoking an era when such tools were commonplace in a traveler's kit. Yet here they painted a picture of deliberate finality amid the flickering neon from the window. Their presence bolstered the suicide narrative, a straightforward tool for a grim act, but it also sowed seeds of doubt, For who brings multiple blades unless expecting a struggle that never came? Coroner Sandra Brining stepped in soon after, her examination cutting through the haze of speculation. With clinical detachment, she ruled the death a suicide, citing exsanguination from self-inflicted wrist lacerations that drained the life from the victim in slow, pooling rivulets across the bathroom tile. The autopsy room echoed with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic outside, a stark contrast to the chaotic world beyond, where rumors already swirled like cigarette smoke in a dimly lit bar. This ruling seemed to wrap the case in neat paperwork, supporting a hypothesis of personal despair, yet it overlooked the whispers of something more orchestrated, leaving the door ajar for those who dared to peer deeper. Then there was the briefcase, or rather its conspicuous absence, reported missing by those close to the scene. Police combed the hotel grounds and the victim's car, their flashlights piercing the night like accusatory fingers, but turned up nothing of the research materials it supposedly held. The search unfolded under a canopy of stars obscured by city haze, the gravel crunching underfoot, and the distant hum of highways underscoring the futility. In an age when secrets were currency and their loss could unravel empires, this void where the briefcase should have been eroded the foundation of the official account, suggesting hands unseen had plucked it away, turning a simple suicide into a riddle wrapped in shadows. Conflicting witness statements only muddied the waters further, some swearing the briefcase was there in the room's disarray, others insisting it had vanished before the police arrived. Voices overlapped in the lobby, laced with the scent of stale coffee and nervous sweat as hotel staff and guests recounted their fragmented memories. In that pre-digital era, recollections were as fleeting as the morning mist rolling off the Potomac. Yet these discrepancies fueled suspicion, propping up the suicide story, while simultaneously inviting theories of tampering and cover-up. Adding to the intrigue were the room keychain anomalies, with multiple keys noted for room 517 floating around the hotel desk like forgotten promises. The clerk's ledger, smudged with ink and haste, revealed duplicates that shouldn't have been, in a building where security was more suggestion than reality. The jangle of keys against the wooden counter echoed through the quiet hours, a sound from a time when anonymity was easier to buy. But this surplus implied access granted too freely, perhaps to those with motives hidden in the night. It was this excess that clashed irreconcilably with the notion of a locked door mystery, undermining the isolation of the act and beckoning questions of who else might have entered uninvited. Early documentation processes captured it all. Reports typed on clattering machines, and photos developed in dark rooms reeking of chemicals, preserving the scene's eerie stillness for posterity. Yet as these facts aligned to support the suicide hypothesis, they also wove a dual narrative of tension, where every piece of evidence that closed the case seemed to pry it open wider, inviting the cynic's gaze. Federal examiners hovered on the periphery, their involvement a nod to larger stakes, but it was the local groundwork that set the stage for what followed. These initial steps, methodical yet fraught with inconsistencies, fed the growing suspicion even as they upheld the official line, creating a tension that hummed like a wire-pulled tart. As we detail the initial investigatory actions, we will then zoom out to confront the institutional response, weighing government and media reactions alongside DOJ skepticism and congressional pressure. The early physical investigation had sketched out a blueprint for an official ruling, one riddled with the static of conflicting witnesses. Now, let's widen the lens to how the machinery of government churned in response, both in the echoing halls of power and the shadowed corridors within. It was the early 90s, a time when the Iron Curtain had crumbled, leaving behind a residue of paranoia and unfinished secrets that clung to the air like cigarette smoke in a dimly lit committee room. Congressional interest surged, particularly from the House Judiciary Committee, which in 1992 issued a call for further investigation into the Inslaw scandal and the enigmatic circumstances surrounding Danny Casolaro's death. Their findings pointed fingers at Department of Justice misbehavior, a bureaucratic tangle that smelled of cover-ups and misplaced loyalties. In those chambers, where the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the rustle of classified documents, this push wasn't just procedural. It hinted at a deeper fracture in the trust between branches of government, suggesting that the DOJ's handling of Inslaw might conceal something far more insidious than mere incompetence. Responding to the mounting pressure, the Attorney General appointed retired federal judge Nicholas Boer as special counsel in late 1992, tasking him with unraveling the threads of both the INS law controversy and Casolaro's untimely end. Boer, a figure emerging from the judicial fog of Chicago's federal benches, dove into the case amid a backdrop of political tension, where the scent of fresh ink on subpoenas mingled with the stale breath of old vendettas from the Reagan era. His review, exhaustive yet confined, ultimately produced a report that aligned the physical evidence squarely with suicide, echoing the autopsy findings and dismissing claims of foul play as unsubstantiated whispers in the wind. Yet, in an atmosphere thick with skepticism, where every sealed envelope felt like a locked door in a house of mirrors, Boer's conclusions only amplified the doubts, implying that the official narrative was perhaps too neatly packaged to be entirely true. By 1994, the Department of Justice issued a press release reaffirming that no credible evidence supported theories of homicide in Casolaro's case. A statement delivered with the crisp finality of a gavel's echo in an empty courtroom. This came against a canvas of institutional reluctance, where the air in Washington carried the weight of unresolved grievances, and every withheld document added to the growing pile of procedural anomalies left unexamined. The DOJ stance not only closed the book but locked it away, underscoring a deeper aversion to dredging up the muddied waters of past controversies, even as it left the door ajar for endless speculation. Central to the frustration were the sealed witness statements and investigative notes, documents shrouded in secrecy that families, media outlets, and even members of Congress clamored to see. In the dim glow of redacted files and confidential briefings, where the chill of bureaucratic stonewalling seeped into every inquiry, these withholdings fueled a firestorm of discontent. They represented more than mere omissions. They embodied the chasm between transparency and obfuscation, eroding public faith in the very institutions meant to uphold justice. Casolaro's family, haunted by the metallic tang of unanswered questions in the air, joined voices with probing journalists and persistent lawmakers, all decrying the veil that obscured potential truths. This collective outcry played out in the early 90s, a period marked by fax machines whirring with urgent memos and newsrooms alive with the clatter of typewriters chasing leads. Their frustration highlighted an enduring tension. While officialdom sought closure, the specter of doubt lingered, suggesting that some stones were left unturned, not by accident, but by design. And yet, It's the persistent echo of those sealed statements that hollows out the foundation of the suicide verdict, leaving room for shadows that no amount of institutional denial can fully dispel. The House Judiciary Committee's 1992 urgings for deeper probes stood in stark contrast to the DOJ's measured retreats, painting a picture of a government at war with its own reflections. In boardrooms and backrooms alike, where the aroma of power mingled with the bitterness of betrayal, this discord bred a skepticism that seeped into the public consciousness. Ultimately, it implied that truth, in the halls of justice, might be less a pursuit and more a commodity traded behind closed doors. As the official inquiries faded into the archives, the air still hummed with unresolved tension, a reminder that some cases refuse to be buried quietly. We will next spotlight key figures in the saga, especially Casolaro himself and legal counsel Elliot Richardson, to better grasp motives, pressures, and interpersonal dynamics shaping the narrative. We've just peeled back the layers of those institutional skeletons, the special counsels and congressional probes that danced around the truth like shadows in a dimly lit alley. Now, it's time to step into the human heart of this tangled web, to meet the souls who chase the darkness, driven by conviction and haunted by what they uncovered. First, there's Danny Casolaro, a freelance investigative journalist based in the gritty underbelly of Washington, D.C., where the air always carried the faint whiff of power plays and whispered secrets. He wasn't tethered to any newsroom desk or corporate leash, choosing instead to carve his own path through the fog of forgotten scandals. Casolaro worked independently on long-form investigative projects, the kind that unfolded over months or years, in cluttered apartments stacked with yellowed court records and sworn statements. In an era before the internet democratized information, he hoarded these documents like a miser with gold, piecing together puzzles that others dismissed as conspiracy. His obsession was the Octopus theory, a sprawling web he believed connected the PROMIS software scandal to deeper intelligence intrigues, from Iran-Contra to shadowy assassinations. Amid the political turbulence of the late 80s and early 90s, with Cold War echoes still reverberating, Casolaro saw not isolated events, but tentacles of a single, monstrous entity reaching into every corner of power. This belief drove him into a secretive long-term project, one he guarded closely, sharing fragments only with trusted confidence over late-night calls that crackled with urgency. The isolation of his pursuit, cut off from the camaraderie of a bustling press corps, amplified the weight of every discovery, turning his quest into a solitary vigil against forces he sensed closing in. Professional isolation bred a growing paranoia, evidenced by the threats he reported to friends and family, anonymous calls in the dead of night that left his voice trembling. In a city where alliances shifted like smoke, these warnings weren't just paranoia. They hinted at real dangers lurking in the margins of his investigation, eroding his sense of safety with each passing day. Casolaro confided to those close to him that he had received threats, shadowy figures tailing him through rain-slicked streets, or veiled promises of harm scribbled in unsigned notes. The era's undercurrent of post-Watergate distrust fueled his fears, transforming every creak in his home into a potential harbinger of retribution from the Octopus he aimed to expose. He reportedly told friends he was in too deep, his words laced with a mix of exhilaration and dread during those final frantic conversations. As the summer heat of 1991 pressed down on Martinsburg, West Virginia, this admission revealed a man who had waded into waters far murkier than he anticipated, where the line between hunter and hunted blurred irreparably. It's in these confessions that the fragility of his lone pursuit becomes starkly evident, a reminder that chasing shadows without backup can leave you exposed, vulnerable to the very beasts you seek to unmask. Now, contrast this solitary figure with Elliot Richardson, a seasoned pillar of the establishment, serving as Inslaw's legal counsel and publicly urging further inquiry into the shadows surrounding Casolaro's death. In the polished halls of Washington Power, where mahogany desks and leather-bound tomes set the stage, Richardson brought his formidable reputation, forged as Attorney General under Nixon, to bear on a case that reeked of unfinished business. Richardson, with his patrician demeanor and history of standing against corruption, expressed skepticism toward the official conclusions, citing unexplained deaths and lost evidence that dotted the landscape like unmarked graves. Amid the post-Cold War recalibrations of the early 90s, his calls for deeper probes echoed through congressional hearings, challenging the sanitized narratives peddled by those in authority. He publicly hinted at deliberate silencing, his statements laced with the gravitas of a man who had seen the underbelly of government machinations up close. In interviews and op-eds that cut through the media noise, Richardson's words painted a picture of systemic cover-ups, implying that Casolaro's demise was no accident, but a calculated strike to bury inconvenient truths. Richardson expressed a belief that Casolaro may have been deliberately killed, pointing to inconsistencies in the suicide ruling that jarred against the journalist's known vitality and determination. This assertion, coming from a figure of such unimpeachable integrity, lent weight to the whispers of foul play, suggesting that the Octopus's reach extended even to eliminating those who got too close. Here lies the dual portrait, Casolaro, the lone seeker navigating foggy back streets with nothing but his wits and a stack of files, his paranoia a shield against encroaching threats. And Richardson, the seasoned legal mind wielding influence from boardrooms and podiums, demanding accountability in the face of evident obfuscation. Together, they embody the pursuit spectrum, from isolated fervor to public gravitas, each illuminating facets of a story that refuses to stay buried. But it's Richardson's insistence on those lost leads and unexplained fates that casts the longest shadow, a persistence that exposes the fragility of the official verdict in ways no lone journalist could. And yet, amid this interplay of isolation and influence, one element gnaws at the core of the narrative: the sheer volume of threats Casolaro documented, which starkly contradicts the portrait of a man supposedly seeking his own end. This is the human drama that propels us forward, two profiles in pursuit that humanize the cold machinery of conspiracy and cover-up. Next, we expose the deep contradictions in the evidence that fuel alternative interpretations, throwing into question the neatness of the suicide conclusion. In the dim glow of hindsight, where shadows stretch longer than the truths they conceal, we turn now to the fractures in the official tale, the contradictions that gnaw at the edges of Danny Casolaro's death, like rats in a forgotten attic. It begins with the briefcase, that elusive phantom of the Martinsburg Sheraton, reported missing in the haze of August 1991, when the air hung heavy with the scent of river mist and unspoken suspicions. Eyewitness accounts clashed like thunderheads over the Potomac. Some hotel staff swore they glimpsed it in Casolaro's room, a leather sentinel stuffed with notes on the Octopus conspiracy, while others blinked in confusion, insisting no such item ever crossed their paths amid the routine clatter of housekeeping carts and muffled phone calls. Police searches turned up empty, their flashlights slicing through the dim corridors, without unearthing a trace, leaving a void that whispers of hasty removals or deliberate oversights in an era when investigative journalism teetered on the brink of digital dawn. This absence isn't just a missing prop in a stage play. It erodes the foundation of suicide, suggesting hands other than Casolaro's might have spirited away the very evidence that could unravel the web he was weaving. Then there are the wounds themselves, those deep bilateral forearm lacerations carved into his flesh, with a precision that defies the chaos of despair, echoing not the frantic slashes of a man at war with himself, but something more calculated, more clinical. In the sterile chill of the motel bathroom, where the tile floors still bore the faint echo of dripping faucets and the metallic tang of blood mingled with cheap soap, these cuts ran parallel and profound, unusual for self-inflicted harm in a time when forensic science was just beginning to map the patterns of human anguish. Compounding the oddity, razor blades were found sealed in envelopes, as if prepared for a ritual rather than a rash decision, their edges glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights that illuminated a scene too tidy for torment. Such details clash violently with the image of impulsive self-destruction, planting seeds of doubt that bloom into questions of coercion or staging by unseen actors in the shadowy theater of power. And let's not forget Casolaro's well-documented fear of blood and medical procedures, a phobia that haunted him through doctor's visits and everyday scrapes, making the notion of him willingly inflicting such grievous wounds as implausible as a noir detective turning down a stiff drink. Amid the oppressive humidity of that West Virginia summer, where tension simmered like forgotten coffee on a hot plate, this aversion stood as a stark barrier, one that friends and family recalled with the clarity of old photographs faded at the edges but sharp in their emotional core. It undermines the suicide narrative at its root, implying a method so antithetical to his nature that it begs the specter of foul play, where fear might have been overridden by force or deception. The rapid embalming adds another layer of murk, performed before family notification in the rushed hours following discovery, the chemicals coursing through veins still warm with the remnants of life, in a morgue that smelled of formaldehyde and finality. This haste, in an age when protocols were bending under the weight of emerging scrutiny, limited any chance for a thorough autopsy re-examination, sealing away potential clues beneath preserved skin and silenced questions. It's a procedural shortcut that reeks of cover-up, fueling theories that authorities moved swiftly to bury not just a body, but the truths it might have yielded under closer inspection. Freedom of Information Act requests later peeled back the veil, revealing sealed or withheld police notes and investigative documents, pages redacted like censored letters from a war zone, their contents hidden in the bureaucratic fog of the early 90s. These omissions, discovered amidst stacks of yellowing files and the hum of photocopiers in government archives, point to a deliberate obfuscation, where transparency was sacrificed on the altar of expediency. Such secrecy only amplifies the dissonance, suggesting that the official closure was more facade than finality, inviting speculation about what shadows those withheld words might cast. Yet, even as the case was stamped shut, FBI interest remained active, their files on Casolaro buzzing with continued surveillance long after the ink dried on the suicide verdict. In an era when federal eyes peered into every conspiracy-laden corner, this lingering attention amid the clack of typewriters and the low murmur of interagency memos contradicted the notion of a resolved matter, hinting at deeper currents roiling beneath the surface. It's the quiet persistence that hollows out the core of complacency, whispering of unresolved threats or hidden agendas that refuse to die with the man himself. These elements converge in a mosaic of misalignment, where each piece refuses to slot neatly into the puzzle of self-inflicted end. Instead, they form a jagged outline of something far more sinister, a silhouette of coercion or murder dressed in the garb of accident. In the end, these contradictions don't just trouble the narrative, they shatter it, leaving shards that point toward alternative theories of foul play, where the octopus's tentacles might have reached even into that lonely motel room. In the dim glow of hindsight, where shadows stretch longer than the truths they conceal, we turn now to the official narrative, the one etched in cold reports and stamped with bureaucratic seals. Having peeled back the layers of doubt and anomaly in Danny Casolaro's final days, it's time to lay out the case for suicide, as presented by those who held the scalpels and the gavels. It begins with the autopsy, conducted on August 14, 1991, in the sterile confines of a Martinsburg morgue, where the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of finality and the faint hum of fluorescent lights casting unforgiving glares on stainless steel. The forensic pathologist's report was unequivocal. Death by exsanguination from multiple lacerations to the forearms, those deep, deliberate slashes that drained the life from Casolaro's veins into the bathtub of room 517 at the Sheraton Inn. In that era of analog investigations, amid the fading echoes of the Cold War's paranoia, such a finding pointed squarely to self-infliction. After all, the wounds matched the razor blades found at the scene, their edges still slick with the residue of a desperate act. This conclusion wasn't just a scribble on paper. It reinforced the notion that Casolaro, burdened by the weight of his unraveling octopus conspiracy, had chosen to end his own torment. A solitary exit in a world that felt increasingly hostile and unyielding. Enter Nicholas Bua, the special counsel appointed to sift through the debris of speculation. His review unfolding in the early 90s against a backdrop of congressional inquiries and media scrutiny that buzzed like flies around a forgotten corpse. Bua's exhaustive report, released after months of interviews and document dives, strongly affirmed the suicide verdict, declaring no credible evidence of homicide amid the tangled web of claims and counterclaims. Picture the Chicago courtroom air thick with skepticism, yet Bua's findings cut through it, highlighting inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts that crumbled under closer examination, like alibis built on sand in a rising tide. What this implied was a reinforcement of the solitary nature of Casolaro's end. If murder lurked in the shadows, it left no fingerprints, no trail of malice that could withstand the light of rigorous scrutiny. Then came the Department of Justice's 1994 press release, issued from the marbled halls of Washington, D.C. where power brokers sipped coffee laced with cynicism and filed away inconvenient truths in overflowing drawers. The statement reiterated that there was no credible evidence supporting theories of murder, while acknowledging the labyrinthine litigation surrounding the Inslaw case and the psychological stressors gnawing at Casolaro's resolve. In an age when scandals like Whitewater were brewing and trust in institutions waned like a dying ember, this official stance served as a bulwark, insisting that Casolaro's death was a tragic punctuation to a life strained by professional failures and personal demons. Bolstering this were the Martinsburg Police Department's on-scene observations, arriving to a hotel room undisturbed by chaos. No signs of forced entry, the door locked from within. The scene preserved in eerie stillness, save for the crimson stains in the tub. The summer heat of West Virginia pressed in through cracked windows, mingling with the scent of chlorine from the nearby pool, as officers noted the absence of struggle. No defensive wounds or overturned furniture to suggest a fight for life? This detail anchored the suicide theory firmly. If intruders had come calling, they would have left marks on the doorframe or chaos in their wake, yet the room whispered only of quiet despair. Amid these affirmations, Casolaro's stresses loomed large, debts mounting like storm clouds, his Octopus investigation fracturing under the pressure of dead ends and elusive sources, each rejection chipping away at his once unyielding optimism. The early 90s air was thick with recession's bite and the Gulf War's distant thunder, mirroring the internal turmoil that might drive a man to such extremes. His notes and calls hinting at a mind unraveling in isolation. Herein lies the core implication. The official conclusion painted a portrait of suicide not as a convenient cover, but as the most parsimonious explanation grounded in physical evidence and human frailty. Yet, even in this fortress of facts, unanswered procedural questions linger like smoke in a dimly lit bar. Why the hasty cleanup? The missing files? These are the fissures that invite doubt, though the reports stand firm. It's a narrative that demands we weigh the weight of evidence against the pull of conspiracy. For in the noir underbelly of truth, sometimes the simplest story is the one that endures. Bua's review didn't just dismiss homicide. It dissected the claims, finding them wanting, much like a detective dismantling a suspect's flimsy tale under the harsh glow of an interrogation lamp. The DOJ's echo in 1994 served to close the book, or so they hoped, on a case that had simmered in the public eye. Its release timed amid broader probes into government overreach. And in that locked room, with no footprints leading in or out save Casolaro's own, the absence of intrusion becomes the loudest testimony to self-destruction. This is the official thread we've traced, woven from autopsies and affidavits, a tapestry that, for all its solidity, still frays at the edges where shadows creep in. But hold that thought, for the night deepens, and next, we'll venture into the alternative abyss, the claims of foul play that refuse to fade, built on missing pieces and motives as dark as midnight ink. We've laid out the official line, the tidy conclusion of suicide that wrapped everything up with a bow, but now, in the dim light of doubt, we turn to the shadows that refuse to fade. The alternative theory isn't some pulp novel assassination plot. It's a quieter, more insidious tale of deliberate silencing, of foul play cloaked in procedural fog, designed to bury truths that certain institutions couldn't afford to see the light of day. Let's start with the missing briefcase, that leather ghost haunting the narrative. Fact is, Danny Casolaro was never without it. It held his life's work, the scribbled notes and documents tying together his octopus theory. Yet, when his body was found in that Martinsburg hotel room on August 10th, 1991, the briefcase had vanished, along with reams of research files that could have exposed too much. Picture the era, the early 90s air thick with post-Cold War paranoia, where journalists like Casolaro chased leads through cigarette smoke and shadowy informants. The hum of fax machines echoing in dimly lit motels. It was a time when information was power, and losing it meant losing everything. The implication cuts deep. This wasn't mere oversight or theft by opportunists. It suggests a calculated effort to erase evidence, to sever the threads of an investigation that threatened to unravel powerful webs, leaving us to wonder what secrets died with those papers. Then there are the threats, raw and persistent, as recounted by family and friends. They testified that Casolaro had confided in them about anonymous calls, warnings that whispered danger if he kept digging into PROMIS software and its alleged backdoors for government surveillance. In those final weeks, the atmosphere around him grew heavy, like the humid Virginia summer pressing down, with Casolaro glancing over his shoulder during late-night drives. His voice dropping low when discussing sources vanished or turned hostile. It was the kind of fear that seeps into your bones, born from an era where whistleblowers often paid dearly. What does it mean? These weren't idle paranoia. They point to a man marked for silencing, his pursuit of truth painting a target on his back, challenging the suicide verdict with the stark reality that someone, somewhere, wanted him quiet, permanently. The rapid embalming adds another layer of murk, performed before his family was even notified, limiting any chance for independent forensic scrutiny. Records show the body was prepared hastily, fluids replaced, and tissues altered, all within hours of discovery in that blood-streaked bathroom. Amid the sterile scent of the morgue and the bureaucratic shuffle of small-town officials in 1991 West Virginia, where protocol often bent to expediency, this rush felt like a veil drawn quickly over potential clues. The metallic tang of blood, still fresh as decisions were made in hushed tones. The deeper meaning here is a procedural sleight of hand that robbed investigators of vital evidence, fostering suspicions of foul play where transparency should have reigned, and leaving families to grieve not just a loss, but a stolen opportunity for answers. Contradictory witness statements further erode the official story, with some hotel staff recalling odd visitors around Casolaro's room, while others claimed solitude. These discrepancies, buried in reports, clash like discordant notes in a smoky jazz club. And here's the fracture that shatters the facade of closure. Despite the case being stamped suicide and filed away, FOIA-released documents and declassified fragments reveal ongoing FBI and institutional interest. Memos circulating years later about PROMIS and its implications, hinting at surveillance that didn't end with Casolaro's death. In the echoing halls of federal archives, where redacted pages whisper of the 80s and 90s intelligence games, these fragments emerge like half-seen figures in fog, carrying the weight of continued scrutiny amid the scent of aging paper and ink. This implies not closure, but a lingering shadow of doubt, suggesting that whatever Casolaro uncovered was potent enough to warrant monitoring long after the gavel fell. A testament to institutional opacity guarding its secrets fiercely. Enter Elliot Richardson, the former Attorney General turned INS All-Law Counsel, whose public statements urged renewed investigations, citing unexplained deaths and lost documents that painted a picture of foul play. He didn't mince words, calling for probes into the voids left by missing evidence. In the polished boardrooms of Washington during the mid-90s, where power suits and stern briefings set the tone, Richardson's voice cut through like a detective's hunch. Amid the clink of coffee cups and the rustle of legal briefs, demanding accountability in an age of eroding trust. His calls underscored the implication that this wasn't isolated tragedy, but part of a pattern, where silencing becomes the tool of choice for those fearing exposure, pushing us to question how deep the rabbit hole goes. Finally, the Muckrock FOIA analysis lays bare the inconsistencies in investigative file handling, outlining withheld notes and erratic redactions that don't add up, piecing together a mosaic of mishandled evidence. Through the digital haze of modern journalism, where FOIA requests ping like late-night telegrams, these analyses emerge from the glow of computer screens in cluttered offices, carrying the musty essence of unearthed truths from a bygone scandal. What it means is a systemic failure, or worse, intentional suppression, that keeps the alternative theory alive, framing Casolaro's death not as self-inflicted despair, but as a deliberate act to mute a voice too close to inconvenient realities. This theory, woven from these threads, paints a portrait of foul play rooted in institutional self-preservation, where opacity reigns and dangerous information is suppressed under the guise of routine. As we step away from these lingering doubts, we turn now to the human cost, the personal and professional fallout rippling through Casolaro's family, his legal advocates, and the wider community still grappling with the Octopus and PROMIS legacies. Having outlined the alternative theory of deliberate silencing, listeners understand why unanswered questions remain and skepticism persists. We now focus on the human and professional consequences following Casolaro's death and the case's official closure. In the dim afterglow of tragedy, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of regret and unlit cigarettes, the fallout from Danny Casolaro's death settled like dust over his family. They were left grappling with procedural irregularities that seemed designed to obscure rather than reveal, such as the rapid embalming of his body before a full forensic examination could even begin. It was August 1991, in the humid haze of a Martinsburg summer, where the morgue's sterile chill clashed with the warmth of lingering grief. The family's disappointment echoed through hushed phone calls and tear-stained letters, as the swift preservation of remains robbed them of the chance to seek clarity through science. This haste not only deepened their sorrow, but cast a long shadow over the official narrative, implying a rush to close the book before all pages could be turned, leaving wounds that time alone could never fully heal. Amid the whispers of conspiracy that swirled like smoke in a backroom bar, the missing briefcase, packed with notes on the Octopus, became a ghost in the family's collective memory. It vanished without trace, fueling suspicions that evidence had been spirited away under the cover of bureaucratic fog. In those early days of mourning, with the scent of fresh earth from the grave still clinging to their clothes. The Casolaros pushed for answers, only to encounter walls of silence that spoke volumes about the institutional opacity surrounding the case. Such erasures underscored the personal toll, transforming private loss into a public emblem of how power could erase not just lives, but the very trails leading to truth. Yet, voices from beyond the family rose to challenge the quiet. Elliot Richardson, the steadfast Inslaw counsel and former Attorney General, publicly urged further inquiry, his statements cutting through the media din like a sharp blade in a dimly lit alley. It was the fall of 1991, amid the rustle of falling leaves and the crackle of press conferences, where Richardson's words carried the weight of his storied career, pushing for scrutiny that the Justice Department seemed eager to avoid. His advocacy kept the story alive, implying that when insiders like him questioned the verdict, the foundations of official truth began to tremble, inspiring a ripple of doubt that would echo for decades. This persistence found fertile ground in journalistic reconstructions, such as the Vanity Fair piece in December 1991, which dissected the anomalies with the precision of a detective's notebook. It painted a picture of intrigue that refused to fade. In the glossy pages of that magazine, amid the aroma of printer's ink and late-night edits, writers delved into the shadows, reconstructing events that the authorities had deemed settled. Such coverage not only sustained public interest, but highlighted the risks of lone inquiry, suggesting that Casolaro's fate served as a grim warning to those who dared to probe too deeply alone. Wide Magazine followed in January 1993, its article weaving digital threads into the narrative, exploring the tech undercurrents of Inslaw and PROMIS in an era when the internet was just beginning to hum with possibility. Against the backdrop of flickering screens and the buzz of modems, this piece captured the evolving landscape of journalism, where bytes and bytes intertwined with bytes of scandal. It amplified the vulnerabilities of freelance investigators, implying that in a world of interconnected conspiracies, going solo could mean vanishing into the ether without a trace. The long shadow extended into the 2010s and 2020s through cable and documentary treatments, which challenged official narratives with fresh eyes and archival footage. These productions unearthed layers that time had tried to bury. In studios lit by the glow of editing bays, with the faint hum of projectors filling the air, filmmakers revisited the case, blending interviews and reenactments to breathe new life into old doubts. Their work revealed ongoing ambiguities, suggesting that institutional cover-ups possess a resilience that outlasts even the most determined probes, perpetuating a cycle of unresolved grief. FOIA documents released post-1994 added fuel to this fire, disclosing fragments of truth amid redactions that loomed like censors' ink blots. They painted a picture of lingering secrets guarded by the state. Through the bureaucracy's maze, where the rustle of declassified papers mingled with the frustration of blacked-out lines, researchers pored over these releases, piecing together puzzles that officialdom preferred unsolved. These revelations underscored the influence on investigative journalism, implying that Casolaro's death had reshaped the field, heightening awareness of the perils faced by those who chase shadows without institutional shields. And here's the thread that unravels the tidy suicide verdict. The absence of that briefcase, brimming with explosive notes, defies any logic of a man intent on ending it all, leaving only the echo of deliberate disappearance. In reflecting on this fallout, we see the personal toll etched in the faces of the bereaved, and the professional caution that now tempers the bold. Casolaro's story endures as a testament to unresolved institutional opacity, a Noir tale where the shadows never fully lift. Next, we dive into the unresolved questions, those lingering evidentiary gaps and sealed records that continue to fuel debate decades later, setting the stage for the concluding reflection. We've just delved into the lingering shadows cast by Danny Casolaro's death, examining how it rippled through lives and challenged the very foundations of investigative work. Now, as the dim light of unresolved questions flickers before us, we turn to those persistent threads that refuse to be neatly tied off, the open wounds in a case that was prematurely declared closed. Let's start with the briefcase, that elusive artifact central to Casolaro's final days. Reports confirm it was never recovered, vanishing from the hotel room where his body was found. Despite thorough searches by local authorities in the humid haze of that Martinsburg morning in August 1991, the air in that small West Virginia town carried the weight of summer's end, mixed with the metallic tang of uncertainty as investigators combed through the scene, their footsteps echoing in the corridor, while whispers of conspiracy already began to circulate among the press corps gathering outside. This absence raises profound doubts about the completeness of the official record, suggesting gaps that could harbor critical evidence, fueling debates on whether deliberate obstruction or simple oversight allowed key materials to slip away into the unknown. Then there's the matter of the rapid embalming, performed mere hours after discovery and before the family had been fully notified or given consent. Documents show the procedure went ahead under the coroner's directive, bypassing standard protocols that typically allow for familial input in such sensitive circumstances. In the sterile chill of the morgue, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the faint scent of preservatives lingering, this haste unfolded against a backdrop of procedural norms that emphasize caution, especially in cases tinged with ambiguity from the start. Such an accelerated process inevitably casts a shadow over the integrity of subsequent autopsies, leaving room for questions about potential evidence destruction and why urgency trumped the usual respect for grieving relatives' rights. Witness statements, too, remain shrouded in mystery, many sealed or placed under federal control shortly after the incident. Official logs indicate these accounts were restricted, accessible only through limited channels that have frustrated independent reviews for decades. Amid the clatter of typewriters in dimly lit police stations and the rustle of confidential files being shuffled into secure vaults during the early 90s, when national security concerns loomed large post-Cold War, these documents were effectively buried, their contents glimpsed only in fragmented FOIA releases. This veil of secrecy perpetuates a cycle of distrust, implying that transparency was sacrificed for reasons that continue to elude public scrutiny. And in doing so, it sustains theories that the full truth remains deliberately obscured. FBI interest didn't wane with the official closure. Files obtained through FOIA reveal active leads and investigations persisting years later, with agents pursuing tips that contradicted the suicide ruling well into the mid-1990s. The Bureau's offices, filled with the hum of fax machines and the aroma of fresh coffee amid stacks of redacted reports, saw a quiet but steady flow of inquiries, even as the media spotlight faded and the nation moved on to new scandals. This prolonged engagement hints at underlying concerns within federal circles, suggesting the case's closure was more a public facade than a genuine resolution. And it invites ongoing speculation about what prompted such enduring attention. Conflicting witness statements add another layer of discord, particularly regarding the briefcase's presence. Some hotel staff recalled seeing it in the room, while others denied its existence, creating a tapestry of contradictions in the official reports. Under the harsh glare of interrogation lamps and the tension of sworn depositions in those initial days, memories clashed like thunder in a storm, set against an era when trust in institutions was already eroding amid revelations of government overreach. These inconsistencies erode the foundation of the narrative, pointing to possible oversights or influences that distorted recollections, and they keep the door ajar for alternative interpretations of the events. Perhaps most puzzling are the multiple deep, bilateral forearm lacerations, documented in the autopsy as unusually severe and symmetrical, diverging from patterns often seen in hesitant self-harm attempts. In the clinical quiet of the examination room, with the cold steel of instruments and the faint echo of unanswered pages over the intercom, these wounds stood out starkly, their precision noted amid the broader chaos of the investigation's early hours. Such anomalies challenge the assumption of a solitary act, especially when coupled with reports of threats against Casolaro, and they underscore how physical evidence can clash with psychological profiles, leaving experts divided. It's this very symmetry in the wounds that pierces through the veil of certainty, defying the expected hesitancy of a man supposedly ending his own life without resolve. These elements, the missing briefcase, the hurried embalming, the locked-away statements, the FBI's lingering gaze, the muddled testimonies, and those precise cuts interweave to form a web of friction. Where documented threats to Casolaro only amplify the discord. In the smoky backrooms of power and the quiet desperation of whistleblowers during that turbulent time, these gaps highlight systemic failures, from procedural lapses to institutional barriers that have long hindered closure. They sustain a chorus of alternative theories, not through wild conjecture, but through the sheer persistence of these unanswered queries, reminding us that in the world of shadows, truth often hides in the details left unexamined. As we wrap this segment, these open questions linger like fog over a forgotten alley, inviting reflection on what might have been overlooked in the rush to conclude. Finally, we will offer a concluding overview, reflecting on the central question posed at the start, synthesizing the evidence and ambiguities for listeners to weigh. Here we are, at the end of the line, staring down the barrel of the question that's haunted this tale from the start. How does a man like Danny Casolaro, a journalist with his nose to the ground, on verifiable scandals, government overreach, corporate entanglements, the shadowy dealings that make the world turn, end up lifeless in a hotel bathtub, his wrists slashed open in a way that defies easy explanation? The air in that Martinsburg motel room hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the faint, acrid scent of desperation back in the summer of 1991, when the Cold War's echoes were still fading and conspiracy theories were just starting to claw their way into the mainstream. Those deep bilateral wrist lacerations slicing clean through tendons and arteries on both sides, led to exsanguination, a clinical term for bleeding out that sounds almost too tidy for the mess it describes. In the dim light of that bathroom, surrounded by the hum of distant traffic and the indifferent buzz of a small-town evening, such wounds imply a resolve that's hard to square with the man his friends knew. A fighter, not one to fold so neatly. It's this precision that whispers of something more orchestrated, challenging the notion that Casolaro could have inflicted them himself, without hesitation, marks or a weapon that fully matched the scene. Then there's the missing briefcase, that leather-bound vault of his life's work, crammed with notes on the Octopus, a sprawling network of intelligence ops, arms deals, and financial intrigue that he'd chased across continents and through muffled phone lines. Picture the chaos of his hotel room that morning. Papers scattered like autumn leaves in a gust, the faint odor of cheap carpet cleaner mixing with the unmistakable void where his research should have been. In an era when whistleblowers relied on physical files, not digital ghosts, its disappearance points to hands other than his own, rummaging through his belongings, suggesting that whatever truths he'd uncovered were deemed too dangerous to see the light of day. And let's not forget the rapid embalming, performed before family could even arrive, the chemical rush preserving the body while erasing potential clues. In a West Virginia morgue, where the fluorescent lights flickered over stainless steel tables and the air was thick with formaldehyde's bite. This haste, against the backdrop of procedural norms that usually allow for thorough autopsies, especially in suspicious deaths, complicates any chance for forensic re-examination, leaving us to wonder if it was mere bureaucracy or a deliberate veil drawn over inconsistencies that might unravel the official narrative. The official investigations, from local authorities to federal probes, concluded suicide, citing no credible evidence of homicide, no fingerprints out of place, no signs of struggle in that cramped space where the wallpaper peeled just a little and the mirror reflected a scene too still for comfort. In the post-Watergate haze of the early 90s, when trust in institutions was already fraying like old newsprint, this verdict rests on documented depression, financial woes, and a note that spoke of farewell. Yet it overlooks the threats he'd reported, the paranoia that seemed less madness and more survival instinct. It's a conclusion that feels engineered to close the book, but one that leaves the door ajar for doubts, especially when weighed against the alternative theories of foul play, whispers of assassination by those entangled in his octopus, backed by missing evidence, and sealed records that even now gather dust in government vaults. These theories thrive in the underbelly of investigative circles, fueled by accounts from sources who spoke of menacing calls in the dead of night, shadows tailing Casolaro through airport lounges thick with cigarette smoke, and hurried footsteps pointing to a hit, master's self-harm. Such notions gain traction from the ongoing FBI interest, decades later, where agents still sift through declassified files in dimly lit offices, the clack of keyboards echoing against walls lined with redacted pages, suggesting that the case isn't as cold as the suicide ruling implies. This persistent scrutiny, amid public skepticism that simmers like coffee left too long on the burner, underscores a vulnerability in the system. How lone wolves, like Casolaro, armed only with notepads and determination, can stumble into webs too vast for one man to untangle without getting caught. Weigh them side by side, the official story, a tragic end to a stressed investigator grounded in psychological reports and scene analysis, against the shadow narrative, where power brokers silence threats with ruthless efficiency, supported by those anomalies that just won't square up. Like wounds too deep for hesitation, a briefcase vanished into thin air. And embalming that raced ahead of questions. It's this mismatch in the forensic timeline that casts a long shadow over the suicide claim, refusing to let the pieces fit without force. In the end, we're left with dual realities. The opacity of institutions that guard their secrets like dragons over gold, in boardrooms and back alleys where deals are struck in whispers. And the raw exposure of the solo truth seeker, navigating a labyrinth of lies with nothing but grit and a flickering flashlight. Casolaro's Octopus, that intricate web of connections, remains as tangled today as it was in '91. Its tentacles reaching into corners we can only guess at, leaving the truth not buried, but suspended in a fog of ambiguity. Did he cut too close to the nerve, or did the weight of it all simply crush him? The facts point both ways. Perhaps that's the real horror. Knowing that in this noir world of ours, some questions are designed to outlive their askers. As the shadows lengthen and the case files gather more dust, we're reminded that justice, like the night, is full of gray areas, inviting us to ponder not just what happened, but why some stories refuse to die. This is Bill Dunlap, signing off from the depths of dark investigations. Until the next shadow calls.